Welcome to Electrified. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. Quick shout out to Paul G. Thank you for using my Tesla referral link and congratulations on your new Tesla. Pierre Ferrigu from New Street Research finally put out his Robotaxi report for 2026. But before I touch on just a few slides, I want to put a disclaimer out there about all of this modeling. Because back in the day, it's something I used to do myself and I really enjoyed it and I thought it was valuable. And don't get me wrong, there can be instances where it is. I just want people to be cautious because we know Elon has gotten plenty of timelines wrong, so of course all of the analysts are ultimately just guessing as well. And as you'll see, it's not like Waymo's dominating the markets where it's competing against Uber and Lyft. Now granted, their costs are still higher, which is certainly a problem, but my point is determining what percentage of the population will remain skeptical of cars driving themselves with no human is going to be very difficult, and I actually think it'll be very different market to market. A very tech-forward market like San Francisco is going to be very different than a more rural setting. But really my biggest problem is just understanding how the market actually works. For example, even if Pierre's model was spot on with every single number, that doesn't mean that the stock market is going to apply this perfect expected multiple to any of these companies at any given time. With so much of the stock market capitalization being driven by AI, it's not really driven by fundamentals and valuations like it once was. And we've watched Tesla go from $400 billion to a $1.5 trillion valuation and back down, where all during that time, not much has changed with Tesla's profitability. So what I'm saying is that company valuations very rarely actually reflect real-world achievement in real time. And then of course you always have to consider the macro. You could have this perfect model built out where Tesla's Robotaxi hits every milestone as expected, but if that happens during a bear market or during wartime, or during a time where there's any major negative economic event, then you're back to just waiting and riding it out, even if you have the perfect model built out. So ultimately, I kind of view them as these intellectual mirages. They can be exciting and enticing, but is it really something that we can change our behavior based on? And in the intro, Pierre said, against conventional wisdom, Uber is likely to retain a solid market position as Robotaxi will not meet all demand and use cases, and as we'd expect Robotaxi challengers to do best partnering with Uber. But look, as I've said, I certainly don't think Uber will become irrelevant overnight, and this chart would prove as much. Here we're looking at Waymo's trips in the San Francisco market dating back to August 2023. So in the 2 years that this chart is showing, you'll see Waymo's market share of ride-hailing trips is still only at 15% after 2 years, meaning companies like Uber and Lyft still retain the majority of the market share. And of course, it's not just because people are skeptical of self-driven cars. It's driven at least in part because in that market, Waymo's cost per mile is $3.30 compared to Uber at $2.50. Now, I will say I definitely think with Waymo's new Ojai, its Gen 6 vehicle, they'll be a lot lower than $170,000 per unit. But as you'll see, this report was put together as of December 17th last year. And right here is Waymo's problem. They say pricing 30% below Uber would likely lead to an over 10x increase in volume, but lead to a $500 million annual loss per city. And as we know, Waymo is not yet profitable even at this higher pricing structure, and Uber today has a margin of roughly 9%. And so for Waymo to hit a number like that, being 30% cheaper than Uber, they're saying they would need a 40% reduction in their cost of goods sold. And of course, for this purpose, that would include operating costs as well. And the report said Robotaxi adoption remains limited to riders attracted by the tech or premium experience, factors that justify higher pricing but constrain market share gains. So again, it's one thing to tell us that Waymo has to cut costs by 40%, but it's another thing to tell us how they're going to do that. And I hope you would agree, I'm really not a fan of oversimplification, but this is just what we've been saying for years without having a report like this. If Waymo can't find a way to bring its costs down and ultimately start making money, it doesn't have a chance of surviving into the future. And if they've been struggling to do that where Tesla's not competing in the market, how in the world is it going to happen when Tesla is? And just to be clear, the report does say that $170,000 per unit number is Waymo's Gen 5 fleet. This report then predicts Waymo's long-term costs, but they still have the long-term projection at a $70,000 cost per car. That's $35K for the car, $32K for hardware, and then $8K for integration and calibration. Whereas the Cybercab cost per car is going to be around $25,000 and hopefully a lot lower, meaning Waymo's long-term projections for what they might be able to get their costs down to is still multiples higher than what Tesla's Cybercab will be this year. It says each Waymo market takes about 3 years to reach maturity, a year of testing and mapping, a pilot phase for limited users, and then a full commercial rollout that expands gradually to 15 to 20% share. So Pierre's analysis means that until Waymo can materially change something with its cost structure, it's going to cap out at a market share between 10 and 20% in any given market. And who knows what Waymo thinks internally, but we know publicly that they're targeting a new 10 plus cities to launch in for 2026, which makes perfect sense if they're capping out at that 15% market share in each city. The report said Tesla is structurally better positioned than Waymo on cost, benefiting from a simpler sensor suite, lower manufacturing costs, and full vertical integration. Tesla also avoids diminishing capital returns. Like Uber, it can tap a flexible supply base, meaning owners' vehicles, to meet peak demand, allowing the owned fleet to remain highly utilized at all times. These advantages, combined with Waymo's long cost curve, give Tesla years to ramp a competitive robotaxi fleet. Then Pierre adds Tesla into the mix, and it sounds like it's just his firm's estimates and analysis, but he puts Tesla in there at $2.20 per mile, meaning it's 30 cents cheaper per mile than Uber already and $1.10 per mile cheaper than Waymo, which to me would likely confirm what I've been saying all along, that Tesla is most likely building its pricing algorithm as if the drivers are not part of the equation. Point being, when unsupervised finally ships in Austin, I don't think we see another huge 50% reduction in the cost per mile from Tesla. They're already pricing quite aggressively and low enough to take meaningful market share from the competition. Here they say what we've already known. Tesla's cost per mile could fall to around 50 cents per mile over time, 40% below Waymo's long-term potential. So yeah, Tesla has a structural cost advantage over Waymo. Waymo buys cars from OEMs, paying the full price, including the manufacturer's gross profit, then buys LiDARs, radars, sonars, cameras, and pays again to integrate all of that into the vehicle. And slides like this show where Tesla has another advantage with the customer-owned fleet. And as we've been saying, this might not happen for a while because Tesla's going to have to validate all of those vehicles, and it won't really need to do that until it starts to build out its own Tesla-owned network. But the main takeaway is when that time comes for any company to achieve 100% of the market in San Francisco for the current ride-hail demand, it would cost Waymo in the neighborhood of $700 million of CapEx, whereas it would only cost Tesla in the neighborhood of $100 million. Because again, during times of peak demand, Tesla can just open up the network to these customer-owned vehicles where the CapEx is already accounted for. This slide shows New Street's estimates have Tesla at $2.20 per mile without a safety driver today. But my pushback here would be anecdotally out in the real world, we've seen plenty of trip comparisons where Tesla is coming in at like 50% of what Uber and Waymo are offering. So if you kept Waymo and Uber the same using New Street's research, that would have Tesla in the neighborhood of $1.25 per mile. And obviously to date, Tesla has done that with a safety driver, which is exactly why I think so far on such a small scale, Tesla is fine taking a loss, just including or writing off the cost of the safety monitor. And again, building their pricing algorithm as if they won't be there. The next slide, Tesla generates with FSD nearly 10 times more miles per quarter than all the miles accumulated by Waymo since inception. This slide also tells us what we've already known, that Tesla has the potential to blitz past Waymo from a scale perspective, especially with Cybercab coming online. So by the end of 2027, Tesla could in theory have hundreds of thousands of robotaxis where Waymo is likely to be stuck under 50,000. And Pierre said there are good reasons to believe robotaxis will coexist with ride sharing for a long time. And guess what? One of those reasons, consumer trust and adoption remain uncertain. Surveys consistently show hesitation. According to AAA, 6 in 10 Americans are afraid to ride in a self-driving vehicle. The share willing to ride in a robotaxi is rising, but still low, 13% today, up from 9% last year. So there you have it. I did leave out a few slides, but I'll have the full report linked below. And look, don't get me wrong, I don't think modeling is useless. It can absolutely be a tool to think through potential outcomes and to play with numbers. But in an AI autonomous world where the uncertainties far outweigh the predictable outcomes, to me, it just becomes more of an intellectual exercise than anything actionable. And as long as you have a long enough time frame and believe that Tesla 1 has a material cost advantage, 2, a safety advantage, and 3, a scaling advantage, then all you have to do is wait patiently for Tesla to deliver and for the market to then price all of that in. MKBHD did review the new Model Y performance, and it was pretty underwhelming in my opinion. He said Tesla has the best self-driving, but he didn't demonstrate it at all or go any further than that. He didn't say anything about the continuously variable shock absorbers on the new performance and the adaptive suspension to contrast it with the non-performance models. He at one point said other cars are more fun because they have traditional buttons. And it just seemed like someone forced him to do this video as if he was doing it against his will. He did praise Tesla for still having the best software, but he caveated that with if you prefer something other than CarPlay or Android Auto, implying those are still better than Tesla's software. So overall, I was not impressed at all, but I did want to touch on it if you want to watch it for yourself because over 1 million people will likely see this video. But as I've said long ago, he lost any Tesla credibility he had, putting out bad info about wireless charging and reviewing outdated FSD software and still refusing to review the new FSD 14. So it is a shame because he has such a big audience, but it might not get better because he also implied that Tesla is not talking to him and he had to get this car from a friend to review it. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but David Moss said the record-setting FSD intervention-free streak is over. His intervention-free streak will end at 12,961 miles. And what caused the intervention? Rural Wisconsin roads, snow, and weather in the teens was just a bit too much. He said, no accident or anything big to note, just found myself in a tricky situation where it was time to take over. But FSD 14.2 took him to 30 states and 7.5 weeks of driving without any human input whatsoever. So that remarkable streak has finally come to an end, which just means that's the new bar and it's time for someone else to go beat it. And I do hope Tesla does something along the lines of the odometer with trip A and B so you can reset your stats anytime you want to, maybe before a trip or to go after a record and so on. So remember years ago when Elon talked about this trip going from LA to New York City, that's about 2,500 miles. What that means is David just did that trip effectively 5 times without intervening once. And I don't care if it's mostly highway driving because he still had to get off to park and supercharge. So effectively going across the country 5 times without intervening is incredible. So look, I know we still have things we need to get sorted in the parking lots and especially with navigation. But I really just hope everybody can stop and appreciate this achievement because it really is a representation of where we are with this technology today and how far we've come in just the last few years. This account I'll call JP has been putting out some very interesting articles as of late on autonomy. Sadly, it's an anonymous account, so I can't confirm this person is who they're saying, but unless they're excellent at prompting AI, it really does seem like they're actually working in the industry. Assuming it's a he, for over 15 years, I've been an expert in sensor fusion for ADAS. He said, I've personally developed and integrated ultrasonic sensors, radars, worked with automotive LiDARs in production, and fused data from surround view cameras as well as third-party computer vision systems. In the world of classical ADAS, I've seen and built it all, and yet I've put every spare euro I own into Tesla shares. Why? Because after a career spent perfecting multi-sensor fusion, I'm now convinced it's fundamentally the wrong path to full self-driving. What follows is not armchair speculation, it's the conclusion of someone whose professional life has been dedicated to making fusion work in the real world. Someone who knows the strengths, shortcuts, and ultimate limitations. He said, after years of building, I've concluded adding radars, LiDARs, and other sensors to cameras does not meaningfully advance us toward FSD. In many ways, it impedes progress. And I'll just share a few key points. He said radar and LiDAR primarily provide depth and relative velocity, data that modern neural networks can already derive sufficiently from camera images alone. LiDAR's fundamental weaknesses: it performs poorly in rain, fog, and on reflective surfaces, and lacks the angular resolution for reliable classification at distance. Radar's limitations: despite better weather penetration, it delivers extremely sparse detections, suffers from clustering and classification challenges, and often masks weaker objects behind stronger reflectors, particularly problematic for static infrastructure in low-speed scenarios. Radar and LiDAR cannot detect critical semantic info like traffic signs, lights, lane markings, or pedestrian intent cues. Stellar computer vision is mandatory anyway; the other sensors cannot compensate for its absence. Cameras are robust enough. Modern imagers match or exceed human eye performance. And things like wipers and airflow can handle issues like raindrops. In truly degraded visibility, the safe response is to slow down, something an AV can do systematically. And despite the camera heaters and everything Tesla's come out with, I still have problems where I'm at with dirt and road salt in these snowy conditions. But to put it into context, for this entire winter season, for me, I've maybe had the red wheel 3 or 4 times that I can remember. And if you only remember one thing from this, let it be this right here: fusion is a crutch. Multi-sensor approaches deliver quick, early wins by patching vision weaknesses, but they mask the need for true mastery of computer vision through massive data and compute. Companies end up over-investing in complex fusion logic instead of solving the hard problem. You might need to double tap on the left of your screen and go back and listen to that a few times and really commit it to memory. And this is exactly what I mean when I say that these other companies are likely to get stuck in local maximums. It is likely to be faster out of the gate, but in the end, it is not going to be the path that takes you to generalized autonomy. So even if it's true that solving the sensor fusion problem continually gets easier thanks to the advancements with neural networks like what Rivian is deciding to do, that still does not mean it's the optimal long-term approach. So I thought that was worth sharing because we so often hear from people outside the industry, and yes, I can read studies and listen to podcasts and pick up cues from Ashok and Yoon Tasai and Elon over the years, but I'm not in the trenches. I'm not working on these technical challenges day in and day out, so to hear from someone that presumably is, to say what we've been saying here on the channel for years, I really do think validates the arguments we've been making. And not that it was needed, but I do think it's encouraging, especially at a time when some people are a bit more uncertain with NVIDIA developing Alpha Mayo. So it's likely to be a noisy race with a lot up for debate for another 6 to 12 months, but it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And this is just another data point that the winner has already been chosen. It's just a matter of it playing out and then the world realizing it and ultimately assigning a value to it. Canada and China have struck an initial trade deal that will slash tariffs on EVs and canola and some other agricultural items. This coming from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Canada will initially allow in up to 49,000 Chinese EVs at a tariff rate of 6.1%, which yes, is coming down from the prior 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, but I think it's important context that this really is just returning to the previous tariff rate before some of these trade wars between Canada and China ensued. So it's not like this is the first time Chinese EVs will be entering Canada. Remember, Tesla shipped cars from Shanghai into Canada for some time. However, the difference is how good Chinese EVs have gotten in the past few years. Carney said, for Canada to build its own competitive EV sector, we need to learn from innovative partners, access their supply chains, and increase local demand. The problem with that is, how are these Chinese companies making EVs going to be partners if they're just selling their products to your market? They're not setting up auto factories in Canada, and I certainly don't think Canada will be getting access to the Chinese IP of its EVs. But for what it's worth, Carney said he expected the EV Pact would drive considerable Chinese investment into Canada's auto sector. And again, in return, Canada is expecting China to lower tariffs on certain agricultural products, but a lot of that is outside of the scope here. There's been very mixed feedback to this news. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer said there's a reason we don't sell a lot of Chinese cars in the U.S. It's because we have tariffs to protect American auto workers and Americans from those vehicles. He said, I think in the long run, they're not going to like having made that deal. And they're saying that 49,000 annual EV limit will go up by about 6% every year until it hits 70,000 vehicles in about 5 years. And any imports exceeding that quota would still face the full 100% tariff. So I really don't want to step out of bounds and speak as a Canadian here, but for my Canadian friends, I would love to hear your perspective on all of this. Of course, as a consumer, I think it's safe to say this would be a win, having access to some high quality EVs that are quite affordable. And over time, it should help to motivate the local Canadian auto industry to innovate and try to compete. And it's true that the Canadian auto sector is not as important to overall GDP as it is in the United States. I believe in Canada, the auto industry is under 1% of total GDP, whereas in the US, it can fluctuate between 3 and 5%. And then we have Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, said, make no mistake, China now has a foothold in the Canadian market and will use it to their full advantage at the expense of Canadian workers. The federal government is inviting a flood of cheap made-in-China EVs without any real guarantee of equal or immediate investments in Canada's economy. And I really don't think this will change too much for the United States. Trump has stayed steady. He says that the Chinese are welcome to set up factories in the US if they hire American workers. But for the most part, no one's really taken him up on that offer. And with the back and forth in the US political landscape, I mean, can we really blame them? So just like most things, this deal comes with trade-offs, but I know the Chinese market is huge for Canadian farmers and the lower tariffs in the agricultural sector are very important. And who knows, maybe more of a partnership between Canada and China does actually materialize. And the consumers win and the Canadian auto industry gets help innovating. Or the Canadian auto industry gets outcompeted over the next 5+ years and the domestic auto sector collapses in Canada. Truthfully, I could see either outcome, but I'd rather hear from you Canadians actually living there in the comments. I'm sure most of you heard J. Cal's comments about Optimus V3 already, but in case you haven't.
Yeah, I don't want to name drop, but I went 2 Sundays ago, I went to Tesla with Elon and I went and visited the Optimus lab. There were a large number of people working on a Sunday at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And I saw Optimus 3. I can tell you now, nobody will remember that Tesla ever made a car. They will only remember the Optimus and that he is going to make 1 billion of those. And it is going to be the most transformative technology product ever made in the history of humanity, because what LLMs are going to enable those products to do is understand the world and then do things in the world that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
I believe it'll be a 1-to-1 ratio of humans to Optimus, and I think he's already won.
So there you go. J. Cal clearly saw something special, and he's declaring Tesla has already won. Then Elon posted feeling optimistic about the future, spelled like Optimus, and shared this AI-generated video. The fact that so many people did not know this was an AI-generated video is already alarming and makes my point that we're headed to a very dangerous world. But the first frame could actually be a real photo that was used to make that video. But listen, the truth is, even if that's the case, we have no idea what this is. We don't know what we're looking at. There's some sort of concealing clothing on this Optimus bot. The arm around Elon doesn't look anything like a robot arm. It literally looks like a pool noodle covered in a black sleeve. And this gold colored hand or glove or whatever we're looking at, I could sit here and speculate for the next 20 minutes, but the truth is I really don't know what we're looking at here. But long before J. Cal said what he said, I've been feeling that it's felt eerily quiet in Tesla land as of late, both on the autonomy front and when it comes to Optimus. So for me, this is the calm before the storm. And whenever Tesla comes out with its Optimus V3 demo, I do think it's going to be a loud reminder that no one is on Tesla's level when it comes to building a generalized humanoid bot. Because just like the sensor fusion problem, much of the competition is coming out with these hand designs that can start doing a bunch of different jobs. But companies like Boston Dynamics and Figure and all of these Chinese companies are not gearing and preparing to do things like surgery. And while I think Elon's timelines are way off for that, the point is the engineering team has that end goal in mind. That's what they're optimizing for, the long tail. They're not racing to market. They're not racing to do basic battery sorting in the factory. They're building a humanoid bot that is generalized in time, capable of doing everything humans can do. And yes, I do think Tesla is going to keep everything close to the chest from here on out until they get into production. So even with the demo, they might be concealing the hand, they might be concealing the body. And I'll sound like Candace Owens here, but I just have this feeling that Tesla is going to come out and show us something that makes it nearly impossible not to overreact. And I just wanted to clarify, there's a bunch of people and articles out there saying that Elon's predicting 50 to 100,000 Optimus produced this year, as if he made that statement recently, when the truth is he actually said that January 8th of 2025, so it was over a year ago. And of course, much has changed since then, which is why personally I'm not expecting anything close to that this year. The 2025 S&P Global Loyalty Awards came out. Last year, we had, again, GM and Tesla earning the two highest awards for customer retention. Tesla was the recipient of the Overall Loyalty to Make Award for the fourth consecutive year. These awards are based on 13.6 million new retail vehicle registrations in the US from October 2024 to September 2025. Tesla's multiple awards highlight a strategy of targeted market appeal and consistent disruption. Its win for ethnic market loyalty to make was driven by remarkable retention among Asian and Hispanic households, at 64 and 62% respectively, rates that significantly outpace the national averages for those groups. Tesla also secured the highest conquest percentage award for the sixth consecutive year. And boiling it down, that just means Tesla is continually winning new buyers from other automakers. So of the 7 overall loyalty awards, Tesla is the winner of 3 of them. In a new drone flyover in Austin, Joe Tetmeyer saw these Model Ys in the parking lot with covers on the wheels, and these large sticker-looking things on the trunk where typically the performance badge would be. In the video, you'll see one of the cars had the coverings fall off, so it looks like that could be the new gray Helix wheels. And for these new stickers on the back, I don't have a confident view, but figured I'd pass it along. NHTSA just granted Tesla a 5-week extension to respond to an investigation into whether its cars violated traffic laws when on FSD. The new deadline is February 23rd after Tesla requested more time to manually review thousands of records to identify incidents that may be relevant. And Tesla just said it has 8,313 records that remained to be reviewed, and it could process about 300 per day. Tesla also cited the burden of responding simultaneously to multiple NHTSA investigations, including separate probes into delayed crash reporting and inoperative door handles, saying the volume of requests could affect the quality of its responses.
And who set fire to a Tesla Cybertruck and dealership in Mesa last spring will spend 5 years behind bars. In April, 35-year-old Ian William Moses put fire starter logs along the outside wall of the Tesla dealership at Southern and Sossaman. Flames destroyed a Cybertruck and damaged part of the building. He also spray painted the word thief, as you see there, misspelling it. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi called the arson an act of domestic terrorism.
So nice to see some justice being served, and just FYI, no domestic terrorism charges were actually filed. The other day we got Euro NCAP results, and today we get ANCAP for Australia and New Zealand. They said the Model Y achieved the highest overall weighted score of any vehicle assessed by ANCAP in 2025, recording strong performance across all areas of occupant protection and active safety tech. This is the second time the Model Y has taken the lead position. And the Model 3 was right there alongside the Model Y, 90% adult, 95% child, 89% VRUs, and 88% safety assist. So nothing we don't already know, but every time it's still great to hear and have it reiterated with new versions. The Model Y, the safest vehicle tested by ANCAP for all of 2025. Tesla is now allowing people to reserve the Sky Pad, the upper level balcony area at the Tesla Diner. So if you want to host an event, requests must be submitted a minimum of 2 weeks before the date. And the Tesla charging account just shared that a fourth business has decided to white label Tesla superchargers. This time it's Wawa in Alachua, Florida. And that did not sound right coming off the tongue, so I looked it up. It's Alachua. And there are 16 stalls at this location. Tesla stock closed the day at $437.50, down 0.24%, while the NDX was down 0.07%. The volume was 14% below the average. Hope you all have a safe and wonderful weekend, and a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters.